Whatever happened to gender? Answering such a question could advance from two different perspectives. One perspective is that people might advance that it's one of progress, that as a society we have advanced in our concept of gender. In contrast, another perspective might be that we've digressed, that currently society has digressed in our understanding of gender, this fundamental fiber of our identity. In entertaining the question, whatever happened to gender, we recognize that over a period of decades, certainly things have changed. If you go back into the 1990s, perhaps you remember RuPaul's notoriety as a drag queen coming out in the 1990s. If you roll forward to 2015, perhaps you remember Bruce Jenner coming out as Caitlyn. Did you know that today, books are available for pre-K children? That is, children between the ages of 0 and 5 that advance transgender ideas. Consider the title Clive and His Babies. This is a board book where a boy gets to play with dolls, hats, glitter, and art. Or maybe consider the book entitled I Am Jazz. And this is the story of Jazz Jennings, who is a trans child and knows from an early age that she has a girl's brain in a boy's body. Did you know that around the ages of 2 to 3, a child forms their concept of gender? And that around age 6, children are beginning to identify as trans children. One survey in 2015 surveyed respondents who identified their gender as different than their sex, and that 32% of who they surveyed were ages 5 or less. 32%. 28% were between the ages of 6 and 10. As we entertain this question, whatever happened to gender, I would like to ask you to think about this overarching question as you consider an answer. Is there anything objective anymore? Is there anything that's outside our minds, outside our own bodies, that can guide our perspective in life? As a society and nation, is there something outside our collective consciousness that can inform our collective consciousness on such an important topic? Why is it so important that we talk about gender? And why is it so important that we talk about it now? In 2021, there was a Gallup poll that was released, and this report reports that between 1 in 5 Generation Z adults, that would be individuals that were born between 1997 and 2003, that what this reports is that there are those who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, that 1 in 5 report that. This is twice the number of millennials that were born between 1981 and 1996. In total, in 2020, 5.6%, and in 2021, 7.6% of U.S. adults identify as LGBT. It's important that we talk about this subject. Maybe you know someone, or maybe you yourself are struggling with body image. Maybe you or someone you know are struggling with same-sex attraction or gender dysphoria or some condition like this. Maybe you know people that are transitioning or detransitioning. And my goal today is to approach this topic with some measure of sensitivity and some measure of the love of Christ. In Mark chapter 6 and verse 34, when Jesus went to feed the 5,000, the Bible says this: "When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things." The compassion of Jesus, it speaks the truth in love. It doesn't pull away from the truth. And people who are LGBT, they need compassion. Jesus was not afraid to sit and dine with sinners. He took heated criticism for that in the New Testament. Can you see today Jesus, if he were here in the flesh, engaging with people that are marginalized in society? I can. If Jesus could speak today to people who are LGBTQ, what is something he might say to them? I think the scriptures point out that he would say this, that Jesus is not done with them, and Jesus is not done with you. He died for you. He died for all people so that you can live forever with him. And now he's living for you, and now he's interceding for you, and now he wants to mediate for you, people of all colors, people of all shades. Jesus would say, I am God, a God of much more, a God of a new creation and a new creation in you. This series here, it's part of a 3-part video series. Lesson number 1 is whatever happened to gender. Lesson number 2 is transitioning is for everyone. And lesson number 3 is to trans and back. And so we want to spend some time right here thinking about whatever happened to gender. What are some of the philosophical currents stirring in our day and age that are playing into this notion of transgender and gender identification? Think about this. When the United States Supreme Court favorably ruled on homosexual unions, it was a famous case known as Obergefell versus Hodges. It occurred in 2014, and a line was drawn in the shifting legal sands of time and culture. The decision, it crystallized a fundamental shift in America's consciousness. Marriage would no longer be exclusively recognized as a man and a woman, but now, according to the High Court, it would be recognized as something different. The Chief Justice on the Supreme Court then, as he is now, was named John Roberts. He disagreed from the majority of the court, and I want you to listen to what he said. He said, "The court invalidates the marriage laws of more than half the states and orders the transformation of a social institution that has formed the basis of human society for millennia, for the Kalahari Bushmen and the Han Chinese, the Carthaginians and the Aztecs." And then he says this, "Just who do we think we are? Just who do we think we are?" Human identity, it has shifted. And the boundaries of the fundamental institution of marriage and the boundaries of the fundamental institution of what it means to be a male and what it means to be a female, they're being shaken at the core of our society. And I want us to think about this question as we think about whatever happened to gender. Is there anything objective anymore? First, what are some spiritual and philosophical and cultural currents that are playing into this idea today? First, when you think about it, the ethics surrounding gender issues, it's really captivating the world's attention. People will ask questions, well, what bathroom should people be allowed to go into? What bathroom should they be allowed to enter? People think about what sports should transgender people be allowed to play? People ask what books should be allowed in public libraries and public school libraries. In medicine, should gender-affirming care be the only option that's offered to your child? If you're a parent, do you want a pediatrician? Do you want a psychiatrist? Do you want a psychologist telling and counseling your child only for gender affirmation? What about bullying? Why is bullying wrong? You see, if nothing's objective anymore, how do we answer these fundamental questions? Multiple federal and state offices have departments of diversity and inclusion, but what are going to be the grounds of inclusion and exclusion? How will we ever define those unless there is something objective? Think about this. Gender dysphoria. That's a term that you've likely heard. Gender dysphoria is the incongruence between one's sex and their psychological gender. It's also called gender incongruence. If you were to look in the American Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the 5th edition, here's how they would define it. Incongruence between one's experience, expressed gender, and assigned gender of at least 6 months duration. Think about this. When you think about gender dysphoria, it's not necessarily the same as homosexuality or being transgender and going through transitioning. What do they mean by this phrase, though? The assigned gender. Think about this phrase. You've probably heard it. The phrase, sex assigned at birth. What does that indicate? The phrase sex assigned at birth would seem to indicate the projection of being male or female by society upon the human subject. The notion is that male or female is not what you are objectively, but it's what society designates you are. It's projected upon you. It's your sex that is assigned. But you see, biology is different. This runs counter to the Bible. In the Bible, gender and sex are binary, either male or female. In Genesis chapter 1 and verse 27, it was male and female that God created them. In Matthew chapter 19, verse 4, Jesus answered, "Have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female?" There was no third sex. In the Bible, there was no distinction between my psychological gender and my biological, anatomical, phenotypical sex. The mind and the body went together in terms of male or female. He made them male and female, Genesis 5, verse 2. And in both of them, he made them in his likeness, in his image. And it was very good, Genesis 1:31, and they were to be fruitful and they were to multiply. Traditionally, when we think about the term sex. It's a biological description. It's based upon genetics and anatomy. Concerning the body, both sex and gender are binary in nature. Your biology, your genetic makeup is either XY male or XX female. In the beginning, God created man and woman, and he caused a great sleep to fall upon Adam. He took Adam's rib and made a woman. Eve was made as Adam's beautiful and wonderful complement. Concerning the human mind, think about this. No act of the human mind makes a person male or female. No act of the human mind makes someone male or female. An act of the human mind may recognize male or female, but it doesn't make you one. When we talk about gender and sex, we're talking about human identity. What makes a man and a woman a woman? From God's creation, what exactly is the essence of authentic masculinity? Since God created us either male or female, what is the fullness for me, for what it means to be a male? Since God created male and female, how do we embrace the fullness of that glory? Philosophically and spiritually, we look for purpose in life. We ask questions like this. Why am I the way that I am? Who made me this way? I am male, but what for? What's the purpose for? We press for meaning in our flesh and in our bodies and in our minds. We ask this question, is there anything objective anymore? And a prevailing philosophy in our world today is postmodernism. And the answer of postmodernism to this question, whether there's anything objective anymore, is a firm no. They say that words are what you make them to mean. Postmodernism says that you can get close to truth, but you can never really arrive at truth. Postmodernism relies heavily on relativism and skepticism. One of the reasons why, in common discussion, people cannot come to an agreement on the psychological gender and biological sex is because of postmodernism. As a scientist would say, biological sex is fixed. It really is something that is objective. Science has prided itself on objectivity, but postmodernism, it doubts reason, it doubts logic, all the while using reason and logic. Postmodernism doubts the findings from science. Postmodernism sees science as destructive. And this is playing into currents in our current society. In postmodernism, humanity is the grand designer, not God. You create your own reality. So when it comes to gender, we ask again, is there anything objective anymore? A prevailing philosophy of our day, postmodernism, is saying no. In our day and age, there's another factor that we need to think about that's playing into this notion of whatever happened to gender. And that's cultural conditioning. When you think about our society and the world in which we live, there are social norms, there are taboos, and these are known in culture. But in today's day and age, there's lots of social media, whether we're talking about TikTok, Facebook, Snapchat, Twitter, YouTube, WhatsApp, Instagram, Discord servers, LinkedIn. Cultural conditioning happens on each of those applications. Take masculinity, for instance. There is this feedback loop between your perceptions and your inputs from the external world. Physically, a man's anatomy is not like a woman's. His muscles are different. His Adam's apple is different. His voice is different. His bone structure is different. His reproductive parts are different. His hair is different. He's different than she is. Physically, psychologically, socially, there is this feedback loop. And here's what happens to males. I'm a male. What do males do? What's reinforcing my idea of what males do? Society either reinforces or diminishes my sense of masculinity. And social media can play a part in reinforcing my idea of what it means to be a male. And for ladies, what it means to be a female. And social media is playing a part. And so when people start having gender dysphoria and questioning, am I a man trapped in a woman's body? It could be that social media is feeding things via algorithms into a child's mind or into a young person's mind, and they're continuing to see, and those behaviors are continuing to be reinforced. So how did we get here historically? What were some of the historical influences that have led us to this point on gender? I want to share with you an observation, and I want to be candid with it. I want you to understand what's happened over the years. In 1968, the American Psychiatric Association had a Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, all the way back in 1968. It was their second edition. And they describe certain sexual behaviors like homosexuality, pedophilia, and transvestitism. They describe all three of those as sexual deviations. Think about that. These are not normal sexual behaviors, they're saying. They're sexual deviations. Currently, the term transvestitism is a term that's outdated. It's no longer in favor. And I don't mean anything derogatory by using that term, but I want us to see what's happened historically. It came into play back in 1922. But if we roll forward in time to 2020 to DSM-5, the 5th edition, homosexuality is not there. It was removed back in 1973. Pedophilic disorder is there, and transvestic disorder, it is there. Gender dysphoria is there for children, and it's there for adults as well. Now think with me about this. When we think about whatever happened to gender, that means that there is something normative about gender. And when we think about deviant sexual behaviors or deviations from the norm, how are we going to define those? You see, if there's nothing objective anymore, we can't define deviations. We're simply moving from a point. But why does it matter if we move from that point? You see, we're arguing for biblical Christianity, and it is a source of objectivity. You can know the truth. You can know that certain sexual desires are not approved by God. And you can know that certain behaviors are not in accordance with His will. There is something objective in our world today. It's given to us by God. And it helps us to evaluate DSM-2, DSM-5, gender dysphoria, and different conditions that people will face in their lives. In the United States, the transgender movement is interwoven with the history of homosexuality. June has been named LGBTQ+. It's called Pride Month. If you trace the history back to 1969, there was a confrontation between police and gay rights activists. It's called the Stonewall Riots. It occurred outside the Stonewall Inn, a homosexual bar in the Greenwich Village area of New York City. At the same time, soliciting homosexual relationships was illegal in New York City, along with selling liquor without a license. New York law allowed police to arrest anyone for not wearing 3 items of binary gender-appropriate clothing. When police raided the bar on June 28th, 5 days of rioting ensued. The next year, in 1970, it is often looked at as the origin of the first gay pride parade on June 28th of that year. Today, multiple retail establishments celebrate gay pride. And they have it on their signage, they have it near their clothing, they're celebrating this thing. And 50 years from 1969, 5 million people gathered to the World Pride Parade in New York City in 2019. These discussions swell at many different places in our culture today. And we could go back to 1990 and talk about RuPaul, who was a famous drag queen. Later that decade, we could talk about Chad Allen, who would star in a TV series, My Two Dads. In 2010, we could go to Laverne Cox, who profiled on VH1 in a series called Transform Me, where a female contestant received makeovers from transgender stylists. You could roll forward to 2015, where Laverne Cox became the first openly transgender woman to receive a Daytime Emmy Award for Laverne Cox Presents, the T Word. It candidly discussed the experiences of transgender youth. In our culture, the debate swells at many different places. In 2015, Bruce Jenner was all over the media. Here was this decorated Olympic athlete who was once on the Wheaties cereal box of the 1970s, now was on Glamour magazine's Woman of the Year 2015 edition. Bruce was reintroduced as Caitlyn in Vanity Fair. In this interview with Buzz Bissinger, it was written, "I think Caitlyn has found her soul that really Bruce never had." Jenner said this, "I'm doing it to help my soul and help other people." Do you see the spiritual connection in this? Since then, Jenner has become the icon of the transgender movement. We see the debate swells in politics. You could go back to 2004 with President George W. Bush when he backed a constitutional ban on gay marriage. However, in 2014, President Barack Obama said that his faith and his beliefs were why he endorsed same-sex unions. Libraries became a hotbed of controversy. In 2021, Maya Kabobe's book, Gender Queer, was named the most banned book in the United States. Kabobe came out as bisexual in high school, but non-binary later. Kabobe does not identify as male or female. The book has been strongly opposed for its sexually explicit content, and at the center of this debate are discussions about free speech. And should books be banned when they're explicit or too graphic? In sports in 2022, Leah Thompson made the headlines. Leah was born male, but after hormone therapy, competed on the University of Pennsylvania female swim team, winning a Division I championship. In medicine and mental health, the debate swells as well. Child and adolescent psychiatrist Scott Leibowitz says, our world, the world of gender care, has exploded. Major bodies in medicine, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American College of Physicians, the American College of Obstetrician and Gynecologists, the American Osteopathic Association, the American Psychiatric Association, they oppose legislation that would interfere with providers providing gender-affirming care as part of primary care. Religious circles, too. They're entangled in the debate. For example, in Georgia, it's been a hotbed of controversy for the United Methodists. 180 churches have sued to disaffiliate from the United Methodist Church over LGBTQ issues. So how does God look at these things? How does God look at gender? I want you to open your Bibles and look at some of these passages and see how God looks at gender. In Genesis chapter 1 and verse 26 and 27, the Bible says, "Then God said, 'Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth.' So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them." You continue reading Genesis 1:31, it says, "And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning the sixth day." What does very good mean? Well, it means physically, man and woman were created very good. Spiritually, man and woman were created good. His identity was pure. He was holy. He was justified. He was cleansed. He could eat of the tree of life and live forever. He was created very good. It was a place where they were in God's grace before sin entered into the world. In Genesis chapter 5 and verse 1 and 2, it says this, "This is the book of the generations of Adam. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. Male and female, he created them, and he blessed them and named them man when they were created." You move over into the New Testament in Matthew chapter 19, verse 4 and 5. "He answered, 'Have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female, and said, Therefore man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh.'" There's no third category between male and female. Your sexuality, your nature that God has given you, either male or female, that's God's gift to you. There's not a third category. Today, sometimes people experience gender dysphoria, gender incongruence when they perceive or feel as if their biology and their anatomy are misaligned with their mind. Someone might say, "I'm not comfortable in my own skin." From a scientific standpoint, a person genetically is either XY male or XX female. Phenotypically, in their anatomy, that's expressed in a certain way with primary and secondary sexual characteristics. To be honest, the notions of changing gender, those are really modern conventions. Sexuality, and when we think about homosexuality, that's not something that's new. But now with advancements in medicine, and now with surgeries that are offered to people and hormones that are given, and these things can change now. People can have top and bottom surgeries, and they can transition somewhat between male to female or female to male. But think about this. When a person goes through that transitioning, genetically, they're still the same. They're either XY male or XX female. Bruce Jenner is still XY male. So when you think about this, these proteins are coding, our genes are coding for proteins in our life, and these hormones are taken to try to reverse the effects. Identity is something that's given to you from God. And when a person asks questions like this, who am I and what am I like? How does God see me and what is my purpose in life? I want you to know this. God breathed life into your nostrils. He gave strength to your bones. He loved you and he created a world in which you could flourish and find him. He wants to give you an abundant life, John chapter 10 and verse 10. He wants you to love life and see good days. In our ignorance and in our sin, God did not leave us hopeless and helpless, but he moved to change us. Is there something inside of me that makes me different from the animals? God's clear answer is yes, absolutely. You're different and you're not like them. You have a spirit, and I've given you your flesh, God says. He's given us a nature and an identity like him when we subscribe to the life of Christ, when we give ourselves over to the life of Christ in a long life's path. When we think about what happens to our identity, there are things that impact it. Sin can certainly impact our identity. So we ask this question. When you think about gender, whatever happened to gender? We ask this question, is there anything objective anymore? And I would argue that there is. And you can find objectivity in the Bible, in the scriptures that are given to us by God. You can find out about the nature of God, and you can find out what true authentic masculinity is all about, what true authentic femininity is all about. You can find out what it means to have the fullness of masculinity and the fullness of femininity. God gives you that in his word. So let me ask you this in conclusion. Where are you at today? Maybe you know someone, or maybe you are someone who's saying, I have to find myself. I have to discover who I am. I have to branch out. It's time to spread my wings. It's time to take flight. I want to blaze my own trail. I want to branch out and discover my boundaries, and I want to walk to the beat of my own drum. Here's my take-home point. Trans people, people with gender dysphoria, people who are lesbian or gay or bisexual, like all people, they need to find themselves. And they need to find themselves in something constructive, not something that will leave them empty or depressed. They need to find someone, a power beyond this world. And Jesus says this in Matthew chapter 10 and verse 39, whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. And people say sometimes, get a life. Well, here's the ultimate life. It's finding your identity. It's finding who you are. It's letting God shape you. Whoever finds his life will lose it. I want to encourage you to find your life in Christ Jesus. He'll give you meaning. He'll give you hope. He'll give you an identity that will live in this flesh now, but will be prepared for an eternal weight of glory. Think about this in conclusion. The American Academy of Pediatrics has a seal. And below that seal, they have a motto that says, dedicated to the health of all children. In 2018, the American Academy of Pediatrics came out with a policy statement that advocates for gender affirmation. In 2023, they reaffirmed that policy statement. It says this, that all clinical office staff have a role in affirming a patient's gender identity. The American Academy of Pediatrics is against what's called conversion therapy or reparative therapy. They say pediatricians, they should not try to convert children away from desires to transition. They say conversion therapy doesn't work. But friends, we're talking about our children. We're talking about kids. We're talking about children that are vulnerable, children that are worth fighting for, children that need our help in understanding what are the depths of what it means to be a male and what are the depths of what it means to be a female. Parents who are setting their 6-year-old on a journey of transitioning are hurting their children. And we can't just lay down and say, okay, you win. People in society are doing it. No, these kids are vulnerable and they need a voice. They need a voice that will stand up for them and speak out. Parents need help because there's a lot of confusion brewing in the world. People need objective truth. You see, the world's definition of transitioning and God's definition of transitioning, they're not the same. But think about this. In God's eyes, transitioning is for everyone. It may be a different definition than what the world gives, but transitioning is for everyone. I hope that you'll join me for the next video as we take up the topic that transitioning is for everyone.